Hey, sports parents, if we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Corona, and I'm the host of the show. Today, we're talking with former Major League Baseball player Travis Snider. Travis made his MLB debut at the age of 20 and then played professional baseball until he was 33. Some of that was in the majors, some of that was in the minors, but when he got to the end of his career, he realized that he had his entire identity wrapped in baseball. Today, Travis is the CEO of 3A Athletics, where he helps sports parents be healthier sports parents. In our conversation, we talk about how his identity wrapped in performance kind of unraveled and what he's experienced through that. From there, we shift into how we can help our kids separate their identity from their performance, how we can help them develop intrinsic motivation, and then ultimately how we can be the parents our kids need through their sports journey. If you like the show today, we're going to ask that you rate us and review us wherever you're listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, writing up a small review would be a huge help. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Most of all, if today's episode helps you in any way, the best thing you can help to share this episode with a friend. With all that out of the way, here's my conversation with Travis Snider. Travis, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to it.
So you and I have talked before. We were just talking beforehand, but for those that don't know you, we always start with the same question. We'll get into your career in a minute, but let's meet Dad. Can you tell us about your kids, what they play, and like what it's like now being sports dad?
Yeah, 3 kids, 8, 6, and 4. Oldest son is currently playing tackle football, his first year doing that. My younger son is going to be playing flag football this fall. As I mentioned before, we weren't able to get a soccer team coach volunteer, so he wasn't able to play soccer this year, which was unfortunate. And then my youngest is currently not in any sports. My daughter's 4 years old. So as we were talking, it's 3 kids. For any parents out there, having 1 kid is a lot. Having 3 kids is a lot. The stimulation level in our household right now is coming off an all-time high. Thankful that school's firing back up and we're getting the kids back in a routine.
But Travis, I thought we had to get our kids in elite level sports at 4 years old for them to have any chance to have a future in the game.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things to talk about with you and other people, right? Is this misconception that we have to keep up with the Joneses and have to follow suit. And I think highlighting that the fear of missing out is something I still experience. We talked a little bit about that before. Where it's like, are we falling behind? But it's that reminder of where our kids are at, developmentally speaking. My kids specifically, I haven't even reached 10, 11, 12. So it's like, for me, I didn't start doing select travel sports until I was 13. And at that point, it got pretty intense. But I think as we're...
And did you make it, Travis? Did you make it to a high level?
I did. Eventually, I made my way to a high level. And I was really fortunate. I think one of the parts of my story it's just the community I grew up in, the group of friends that I had that I played with from YMCA, rec league stuff, all the way through Little League, and then on through our senior year of high school. So to me, this concept of youth sports is a very powerful one. And I think that the idea of community and how that's being built around your kids through this experience and stuff like we talked about, man, being able to help people out with rides and just knowing, everybody's overwhelmed. And I think the more that we can come together and help each other, it's going to help everybody in the end.
I want to set the tone for everybody listening. The first time me and Travis ever talked, he's like, "Hey, give me a call," or "Can I call you? I got something I want to give you." We talked for an hour. It was one of those conversations where we set aside 15 minutes to talk to each other, and an hour later, we're both like, "Hey, we got stuff to do today. We probably need to hang up, or else." So if we go a little long today, I'm just letting you know, that could happen because that's what happens when we talk to each other. Today's a little different though than most episodes because I don't want to go straight into how we can help our kids because I think your story is a powerful one that helps frame this entire conversation and gives a kind of a tangible example of what we're kind of fighting against in this whole sports thing. So if this can happen to someone who has reached the levels you've reached, then it's going to happen to our kids just naturally because at some point, every kid's career is going to end. And you told me when we first talked that when your career ended, you realized that your identity and your self-worth were directly tied to your performance. So can you take us back to that moment when it's like, all right, I'm done playing. Who the heck am I? What did it feel like to recognize that? And how old were you when you recognized that?
33 or 34. Okay. I had started working with my now partner, Seth Taylor, who's a therapeutic life coach. And Seth was the first person I'd worked with in that space who really opened my eyes to how that identity formation took place throughout youth sports. And then, being able to play professionally for 16 seasons, a lot goes into, building that up. And I had my wife and I had our third child that year in Gwinnett, Georgia. I was playing for the Braves AAA affiliate and was in a place in my career where I was a bench player. I was there to mentor younger players and just kind of had the reality moment of, what am I really doing here? And I'm chasing this dream of getting back to the major leagues, thinking that that's going to validate everything that I've done for my entire career of playing baseball professionally and amateur. And as I started to unpack this stuff with Seth, I just lost my father. So that's a big shift, right, in the family dynamic when you kind of become the head of the family, even though in a lot of ways I had took on that role at a very young age. And it was really unpacking the multiple layers, and I'm still unpacking this in therapy and will continue for years to come because I recognize being diagnosed with complex PTSD and learning more about some other stuff that I've been not officially diagnosed with, but understanding how this stuff kind of builds up over time. And for me, the idea of being the baseball player was always something I wanted from a young age, and I got to achieve that goal of playing in the major leagues at 20 years old. And then as my career went on a roller coaster ride, more of the self-doubt, more of the struggles mentally and emotionally started to surface, but I also did a very good job of suppressing those. So it was finally at the point of my end of my career where I had to go back and think through and work through a lot of these experiences that I had as a professional athlete, but then it tied back into the deeper childhood experiences, which we'll get to, later, but it just understanding that I don't want anybody to feel bad for me because I was a Major League Baseball player. That's not the point of this. The point is we as athletes, and I think this applies to anybody listening that is a professional and in a job, we identify ourselves by our career title, our salary, our, what it is that we do versus who we really are. And that was a big differentiation that I had to start making is who is the man that I wanted to be outside of the baseball player? Because for many years of my adult life, baseball was the number one thing. It was the number one priority. It's what really drove the ship instead of having those clear, defined core values and who do I want to be as a husband, who do I want to be as a father, and who do I want to be as a person in the community.
Yeah, and the reason I joke at the beginning of this about like, if this can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. And you said you didn't start playing select or travel till like 12 or 13. We've got kids like making the 5U All-Stars and going travel at 6 years old and stuff like that. And we as parents wrap their identity around who they are as a ball player. And you see recruiting profiles for 8U kids who are trying to get NIL deals or get into these camps. And it's like, we inadvertently, I think it's inadvertently, put this pressure on our kids and put this identity onto them as in like, they're a 2034 athlete or they're a basketball player or they're a baseball player. And that becomes not just their personality, but it becomes their identity. And so then when it comes crashing down or when they don't make the team or God forbid their interests change, it's like, who am I? And go ahead.
Yeah, I think, all the things you're touching on, it's become normalized. And I think as parents, a lot of us have our first child. And again, there's a bunch of books you can read, but I think that's where you and I and other people like us in the space have really found a lane that we want to get in and we want to build content around and help educate ourselves as parents as much as we want to educate other people through this mission, because we're talking about kids that are in a very different identity formation stage than the 16, 17, 18-year-old kids when college recruiting, when, draft type of stuff for baseball starts to really get serious. And we're placing this level of expectation. I know we went back and forth on this in terms of looking at our kids as an investment and what is the return on investment. Because let's be honest, this stuff isn't cheap, right? And the more that you participate in, not only is it a big investment from a financial standpoint, but it's also a big investment from a time and energy standpoint, even at the rec level. So for us as parents, it's hard to maintain that level of non-attachment, right, to what our kid is going to become when they're 18, 19, 20 years old in terms of their sports careers. And because there are parents out there that either can afford it or feel like they need to do it for their kids starting at such a young age, a big thing we try and get across to parents is that at that stage 0 to 10, right, kids are really looking at mom and dad for, am I safe, am I loved? And then they start to go through, like your daughter's going through this transition into adolescence, and it's like, now we're getting to the place where they're really looking at the world outside of just mom and dad. But when we put them in the arena of competitive travel sports, or even sports in general, right, I think this applies to rec leagues as well, we feel this pressure as parents to have them out there on the field. I know one of my children, it took him about 2 years to really become comfortable going out there on the field, and he loves sports. He loves to play. We don't
realize how much bravery that takes to get out in front of 50, 100 people who are screaming and yelling and go play something you might not be comfortable with.
Absolutely. And then you start to build in achievements along with this. And I didn't play select travel, but we had very successful Little League teams. We won the state championship for our All-Stars in Washington 2 out of 4 years. And the other 2 years we took second. So, I mean, we were a powerhouse, we'll call it. And I went to the Western Regional Tournament at 11 years old. I'd thrown a no-hitter and hit 2 home runs in the semifinals of the state championship tournament. And I went down there, and we're on a bigger stage. There's thousands of parents there. And I had a panic attack. Like, I'm on the mound, I throw a perfect inning, hit a home run, and then go out there in the second inning. And the stadium started closing down on me.
And we didn't have that language then either. So you didn't really know what was going on.
Absolutely not, right? And our parents at that time didn't have, access to the resources and the content and all these things that are out there and available now to really know how to handle that, right? So we chalked it up as like an asthma attack. I was a kid with big emotions, and I think we got to highlight there's, every kid's a little bit different. Even my 3 kids, there's different personality traits, but the bravery it takes and the understanding for the parents entering that space as to what is your child's experience actually like versus what do we perceive their experience to be like. And when they're 0 to 10, the more that we can start to have those conversations about their feelings and about those experiences and helping them process that in a healthy way instead of trying to fix it, I think that becomes the challenge we face as parents in youth sports, is because they are going to go through some highs and they're going to go through some lows. And these can be incredible teaching moments. But if that identity is tied to the achievements, right? We talk about achievement-based identity a lot. That's what started to happen to me even before I got into the select space. And I think that's what happens to a lot of kids when they're in this competitive arena, is we win state championships and, we're all tournament and we're perfect game or whatever, all-star titles that are out there. And that becomes the identity, right, on social media and in the community.
Yeah. So you're talking about the younger age, and that's what I had on my list to ask you next, because you told me that the first, when you were 19, you'd always been the guy in baseball. You'd always been that dude, like capital T, capital D, that dude. And then 19 is when you first hit some adversity and you weren't quite sure how to handle it. And so when you look back at little Travis, what pressures stand out through those little league years, through those select years or whatever, that maybe you didn't recognize as a kid, but as you've gone back and done this unpacking and done this mental work, like what stand out to you now that maybe you didn't recognize back then?
I think the internal validation versus the external validation. And when you have articles being written about you from 9, 10, 11, 12, and now social media just perpetuates this even more, right? Because it's just more exposure. But at that time, we, like I said, had successful teams. I had successful, individual statistics through all of this stuff. And going into high school had really built the hype. I played varsity football as a freshman, first person to ever do that in our school history, started at middle linebacker. I mean, I was physically developed. I haven't grown since freshman year. Yeah, that guy. And I think one of the things that I see you highlight and we try and highlight too is just because your kid is the best at 9 or 10 or 12, right, doesn't mean they're going to be the best at 15 and 16. And if we put that label on them that they are the best, it's going to be a lot harder when they hit that adversity like I started to in my professional career. So those younger parts of me that I'm processing through my therapeutic journey is understanding what is your belief about self, right? And what in that moment do I believe that I'm that dude, or do I believe that this is a goal for me to play Major League Baseball, and here are the steps that I need to focus on taking one day at a time. And the accolades, the achievements, and the press and the notoriety is going to come, but that's outside noise. That's not what I'm chasing. My goal is to become the best baseball player and now the best human being that I can be, versus just selling out for everybody else's giving me the flowers and praising me and putting me up on this pedestal.
So looking back to then, that middle school, high school time, if younger Travis could have heard one message about his identity outside of baseball, what do you wish teenage Travis could have been told about himself?
That's a fantastic question. I think my parents tried through their own personal struggles.
But teenagers are teenagers, dude. Like
for sure, for sure.
They could have done everything right, and that dude Travis probably would not have accepted it because you were a teenager who was really great at baseball.
Yeah, and I think it's just understanding the difference between who you are and what you do. And what you do is play sports. What you do is what we do for a living now as adults. But who you are is the personal development stuff that I really have subscribed to as an adult, is just trying to focus on being a lifelong learner. I'm never going to be a finished product. I'm going to continue to make mistakes. I think repair is a huge thing we got to learn as parents. But for me as a 13, 14-year-old kid is just understand everything's going to be okay, right? Because at the end of the day, you start to perpetuate this idea that if you don't achieve, it could be making the junior varsity team or the varsity team, or it could be, being a first-round draft pick on the high end of this conversation, where we start to develop that attachment to, if I don't achieve this, then I'm going to be less valuable. So like I said, tying that self-worth and identity just to being the baseball player or the stud athlete at the time, instead of, what are the things that I can continue to work on as a human being that are going to serve me when the day comes that they take the jersey away.
Well, and even like big picture outside of that, I mentioned in our episode earlier this year with licensed dietitian Farrell Frankel, we were talking about food, and I'd always been called big guy. And I always thought I was big and fat and all those things already. So when my parents came to me in 10th grade and told me I was gaining weight and that they saw some unhealthy patterns, and I was so offended by that because I had already told myself I was the fat kid. And so I didn't notice the 50, 100 pounds that I gained between my sophomore year of high school and sophomore year of college. Like, until I got to that 360 something pound, 50 pounds, like I never realized I was there. Because in my mind, I had always thought that was who I was already. And so like the idea of separating or taking these things we hear about ourselves or we hear other people say about us and separating them from who we actually are is one of the most important things we can do. And as a kid, as a teenager, it's nearly impossible to do that on your own, which is why it's so much more important for parents to be reinforcing true identity and not performance-based identity.
For sure. And I'm still in my best friend's phone saved as the fat kid and went through the ebbs and flows.
In my brother's phone, I was fatty. He was the kid.
Yeah. And in my experiences, I'll never forget this. 10 years old, all-star team. I was probably 150 pounds at 10 years old. Like I was a big boy. And
I'm going to interrupt you. I remember 7th grade football because I'm a year younger. So I entered 7th grade football at 11 years old. I was 5'6", 168 pounds. Like I was a giant. And then I never grew after 13. So I was like 6 foot by 13. And then I only grew out instead of up at that point.
A very similar experience. I was 5'8", 185 at 13.
Yeah.
6 foot 225 as a freshman, and I'm 6 foot 235 right now. But
I've touched on that though.
Thank you. Yeah, I've touched 269 on the scale. The nickname Lunchbox is because I do like to eat and I like to cook. But again, these are life skills, right? The idea of how you eat, and I did have some good influences on me within the community outside of my parents, who pulled me aside a couple of times and were like, "Hey, man." you work really hard at this and you work really hard at that. What about, looking into some of this stuff on how to eat better? And it took time, right, for all of us as adults to develop what is our eating patterns and how do we want to structure our diet and exercise stuff. But it definitely was something as a kid. I had a parent when we were 10 that was, gossiping in the stands because her son was a catcher and I was a catcher. And she goes, yeah, just wait, Travis is going to eat himself out of baseball. And that's something I knew as a 10-year-old kid. There was a mom in the stands saying that. So again, these are all things that as you experienced, right, this starts to become our identity. Now, these things can be used for motivation, but a 10-year-old kid shouldn't have a parent who's saying that kind of things about them in the stands. And that's right. The emotions and the attachment of that particular mom who felt that was the best way to express her frustration with the situation that I was playing instead of her son.
Yeah. We could do a whole conversation about parents responding out of their own insecurities, but different topic, different day. You're very open about therapy. You've talked about it on here already. Like just in your life and on your platforms, you're very open about therapy, which is something I love about you. But when you started working on yourself in that way, what were some of the hardest patterns or beliefs that you had to unravel as you went through it and as you started up?
I think just the diagnosis, which is still kind of complex PTSD is something that I've learned a lot about throughout this journey and how, traumatic experiences, both my parents had battled addictions. So there's a lot of instability in my household with my primary caregivers that I'm still working through. Currently, I've been doing EMDR treatment, which is psychotherapy. That it's been awesome. Seth was my partner now, was somebody who took me through a lot of these types of experiences. Is just being able to tap into the past core memories that you carry in your subconscious. And being willing to talk about them, right? Because we all have these things that are shoved deep down there. We have these embarrassing moments. We have these, traumatic experiences. We have these things that have happened to us that impact the way that we respond now as adults. And we talk about parent insecurities. A lot of those come from unmet needs in our childhood or things that we develop as we get older and don't realize that we're carrying those extra baggage with us. And it's something, I battle all the time, and parenting and my marriage is what part of me is showing up? Is it the 37-year-old man who has, quite a bit of wisdom to bring into a conversation, or is it the 14-year-old kid who is triggered because of this situation?
Who's still inside the 37-year-old man. Like he's still 100%,
there. 100%. And that's part of, again, I'm not preaching to anybody you have to do MDR, you have to do a specific therapy, but I think as I started to understand how those younger parts of me impacted my personality and how I interacted within my relationships and my lack of emotional regulation in certain situations, it just, as I've learned more about it and I've started to work and make these adjustments, you're like, man, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal. You know what I mean? But this younger part of me still needs to be worked with and processed in a way to where I'm aware of that trigger. I'm aware of that moment where I feel that rush in emotions, and it takes me to a place that I don't want to be.
And I think the thing that we don't realize is that for all the beauty that youth sports bring, they also hold up a mirror to the insecurities we've buried deep inside of us. And those voices that we thought were just gone and not there anymore. And the reality is, if we don't name those insecurities and if we don't acknowledge them, those insecurities are what start to run the show. And they shape how we experience these years as sports parents. They influence how we act on the sidelines. I mean, those insecurities drive the conversations on the way home. Like all of those things are based and rooted in things from our past that we may have worked on, we may not have worked on, but they come up. And when they drive the bus, that's when bad things happen. And what I'm so adamant about is the insecurities aren't bad. They're like, there's nothing wrong with you if you have insecurities. That just means you're a human being. But we have to name those insecurities, because when we shine a light on them, they lose their power. And they're like roaches and cockroaches that they run back into the cracks of the walls once we shine a flashlight on them. But if we don't shine that flashlight, they're still going to creep around the outside and influence what we do.
Yeah. And back to my therapeutic journey, it shows up in, the moments where we're rushing our kids out the door. And I had one parent who was 20 minutes early or you're late. And I had another parent who was very much not that way. Yeah. And so, experiences that I had with my dad were showing up in, my at the time 6-year-old son who, he needs 30 minutes to tie his cleats and get all of his gear, and I'm trying to get it done in 5 minutes, and now I'm getting mad, and now I'm yelling, and now we're in the car and we're going to we completely blew the whole opportunity there to build a connection, right, and create a safe space. And I think those insecurities are things that, when I partnered with Seth, he had already written this book, and we've reframed it. It's titled Hero, and we were talking about this via text. We want parents to understand, based off our conversation, how being the hero in your child's youth sports experience is not by getting them to the major leagues or getting them to a Division I scholarship. It's you being willing to use this experience to look in the mirror and shine the light on those things that are impacting your ability to connect with your child, especially in the 0 to 10, 0 to 13 age group, because we all know that I don't know if it's 85% of the time we're going to spend with our kids, right? Is in that block time. And now we're filling the schedule with all the things that we fill the schedules with. That I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty. You and I talk about it. We do it too. But it's like, how are we building in the time for us to continue to grow and evolve as parents and as people? And youth sports can be a wonderful vehicle, right, for our kids to learn these life experiences. But we as the parents have to be willing to do that work, have to be willing to challenge ourselves to evolve our thinking and our approach to the important moments, like you said, the car ride to, the car ride home, and what we experience on the sidelines when we watch our kids play. Because I don't know many, if any, parents that actually don't feel any emotions, right, when they watch their kids play. It doesn't mean emotions are bad. Like you said, This is a human experience. But what are the thoughts and emotions that are driving the behavior, right, that leads to the moments where we're actually doing damage or we're doing harm to our kids' experience? And I think for me and Seth, as we work together professionally, and now we've been building this company, it's really to help parents understand, right, what we're bringing into the experience, and then how can we unpack that in a way that's going to impact our child's ability to enjoy and find joy in the sports that they play and build a stronger connection, instead of what I've seen a lot in my community of friends that I grew up playing with, and the thousands of teammates that I've had in my life. You have a lot of relationships with a parent that becomes toxic in sports, and that leads to long-term damage. I've seen it from an addiction standpoint. I've seen it from a suicide standpoint. I mean, these are things that, are the worst case scenarios, but I think we don't recognize that how impactful these core memories are that we're making with our kids in sports, and how that leads into, self-image and self-love and self-worth as they become adults.
Yeah. Man, this has been so good. We're going to take a quick break and switch gears to talk about how we do some of this stuff with our kids. But before we do that, we're going to share some resources with you on how you can help with this youth sports journey, and then we'll be back with Travis in just a minute.
Have you ever showed up at the wrong field at the right time? Hey, my name's Zoe, and I've got 3 athletes on club and travel teams, and that's happened to me one too many times. So 2 years ago, I created a new app called Torgo, exclusively for sports parents. It imports schedules from all the different team apps, as well as your personal calendar to keep the entire family, including your kids, on the same page. Go to orgohq.com, download directly from the App Store or Google Play, and make Orgo part of your winning routine. Get the right people to the right places on time.
Hey, it's Jonathan. If you haven't heard of the Weekend Playbook yet, let me fill you in. It is a short, no-fluff email I send out every Friday morning to help you head into your games with a little more intention and a whole lot less stress. They're simple reminders you can use before, during, and after your kid's game. And when you sign up, I'll send you some resources from one of the best youth sports organizations in the country. The link is down in the show notes. Go sign up today. We're back with Travis Snider. Travis, you've said that your pressure and anxiety started in youth sports, and you didn't even realize it at the time. It's taken this therapy and this work to realize where some of these things came from. But switching from your journey as a player to now as a dad and a coach, what are you doing differently with your kids and the kids that you coach to protect them from carrying those same weights in their playing careers?
Really trying to educate myself on what are the different developmental phases, like we mentioned before, and what is the assignment, what should the expectation be. And I've coached in baseball, basketball, and football from 4 to, my oldest is now 8. And I see so many parents and so many coaches in this space who don't understand, or maybe they do, but they just kind of lose sight or perspective because you get into a organized sports experience or even an unorganized sports experience where we want our kids to develop skills, right? And we want our kids to learn discipline, and we want them to have accountability. And these are all fantastic things for us to want for our children. But when you have 6 and 7 and 8-year-old kids in a practice setting or in a game setting, and as coaches, it's easy to start to treat them like they are 13 or 14, or, you know, the 13 and 14-year-olds, they're trying to treat them like 18,
Pre-professionals,
19. Yeah, exactly. And again, I've been involved on the player development side for a local baseball organization here. I've had a lot of conversations with parents when I was in that role, and in my own coaching experiences. I just see where we lose perspective pretty quickly of where our children are at, and it's tough, even as, you know, as a man who's working through his own stuff, to be able to zoom out and take that 10,000 foot view and say, okay, where are we at in this journey, and what is most important throughout this process, and making sure that we have that perspective. And when we lose it, because we're humans, we understand how to repair that, right? And that could be, you know, me, I got really upset with my son after a rookies coach pitch game because him and the other team started jawing each other, you know, going at it. We'd played against this team for a couple years. They're 7-year-old kids or 6-year-old kids, right? That's totally normal behavior. Yeah, I want to get my point across to my son that sportsmanship is important. Yeah. But in that moment, my ego took over, right? And I'm yelling at a 6-year-old kid while my 4-year-old son's sitting right next to him in the back of the car. And I see their eyes start to well up with tears, and I'm like, this is.
And the 6-year-old wasn't in the emotional state to receive what you were saying anyways.
I mean, yes, the car ride home.
Even if you were saying the right thing, it was not the right time because he couldn't receive what you were saying. He was still too emotionally invested in what he just did.
100%. And we've just finished a book on the car ride home, just 10 principles of the car ride home, because you and I understand how important this moment is. And I like to tell that story because, number one, I blew it. I'd already started this company, and I'm out here, you know, pushing this message, and here I am in the car losing my mind on a 6-year-old kid about sportsmanship. And, you know, I got home, I talked to my wife.
The irony of that, like, I'm going to yell at my kid about being a good sport.
Yeah, which is, I mean, number one, are my emotions regulated, right? It could be on the sideline, could be in the car. It could be anytime we have a conversation around sports. If my emotions aren't regulated, the message is going to be lost. And the timing of it, like you mentioned, is crucial to understand that the car ride home is not about correcting mistakes. It's not about coaching your kid up. It's not about fixing something that went wrong that day. It's about building the connection, focusing on their emotions, and allowing them to speak if they want to speak on this stuff. But having that boundary and respecting that boundary that they don't need coach, they need dad, or they need mom, or they need, you know, primary caregiver in that moment, just to build a connection. And as they get older, this evolves, these conversations evolve, but we put our kids in school and then we stick them in, you know, organized sports after school, and they're overstimulated as it is. And in that moment, we're trying to get a message across that really isn't going to land.
Yeah. That car ride home, I was just doing an interview before we started recording, and we talked about the car ride home. And what I always say is the car ride home is the worst place for unrequested feedback, period. That doesn't mean it's a bad place for feedback. It's a bad place for unrequested feedback, meaning our kids have to be who are in control there. And we have to set aside our desires as parents to get those feelings and emotions out of us, and instead elevate what our kid needs in that moment. Some kids are going to want to verbally process in the moment, and they're going to but let them ask the questions. Some kids, they just want to put their headphones in or listen to Spotify or whatever, and they just want to switch gears. Some kids, by the time they're done playing, that's over. What's next? Like, what are we going to now? Where are we eating? So it's the unrequested feedback that's the issue. Like, we have to be mature enough to set aside what we want to talk about for a time when they're available to receive it. And that takes emotional maturity on our part that a lot of times, if we're honest, we don't necessarily have.
Yeah, and I think every parent experiences that in one way or another. And I loved how you highlight unrequested feedback, because there can be great conversations that happen in the car pertaining to what happened out there on the field. But it's got to be led and driven by your child, not by you. And those emotions that we feel in that moment is raising our own self-awareness to, again, this is my whole therapeutic journey. When am I triggered? When are these emotions starting to come up for me? And being able to process that in the moment without projecting it onto my child. And being willing to revisit that moment at some point in the future and like, what really came up for me in that moment that I needed to force this conversation down my son's throat and led me to reacting the way I did in that story with the car with my son. And being able to make peace with whatever it is that you're carrying with you, and then be able to acknowledge as you move forward, you're not going to be perfect, but man, the more that we can be aware emotionally in those moments, the less harm and less damage we're going to do to our relationship with our kids.
One of the things I've had to be able to separate is Dad and Jonathan. What Jonathan needs in this moment a lot of times is different than what my kids need. My kids don't need Jonathan in that moment. They need Dad. And so I've got to set aside my own insecurities, my own fears, so that I can be who my kids need in that moment. And that changes as our kids get older. Like when our kids are teenagers, like letting them in to see Jonathan a little bit more and to talk about, hey, like there's this going on inside of me. Like this is what I'm feeling. Then sure, that helps them. When they're in that elementary age space where we're still their heroes, they just need Dad or they just need Mom. They don't need your big bag of insecurities. And that doesn't mean that your big bag of insecurities doesn't exist or shouldn't be there. It just means that there's a time and a place for us to allow those to impact what we do. And so as parents, we might just have to like carry those insecurities with us for the next hour so we can be who kids need. We can be Mom and Dad. And then once they get settled, we can go off into our little place and like, okay, I need to deal with me for just a minute. And taking that time is a great thing to do, but there's some compartmentalizing that we have to do as parents so that we can be what our kids need in the moment.
Absolutely. And I think finding a healthy outlet, whatever that means to you, to process those emotions away from your kids. And, you know, I would encourage every parent too, to know you're going to have those moments when you don't. And when you don't manage your emotions, it's such a wonderful opportunity to teach your kids about accountability and repair. And I think that, you know, the idea of being the perfect parent is something we will never achieve. But in these moments, right, where we do slip and we can take ownership and we can acknowledge that we had big emotions in that moment, and that's normal, right? And I think that's important for our kids to understand is we
and apologizing to our kids is one of the best tools we have in our toolkit of helping kids understand emotional maturity and helping them build emotional resilience, because apologizing doesn't make me weak. Apologizing means that I realized I did something that I shouldn't have done, and I'm taking ownership for it and coming to you in a vulnerable state to say, I blew it, I'm sorry. And that's not weakness. I think that's the ultimate sign of emotional strength.
And that builds the strength long term, right?
Yes.
That builds the trust long term that when they make that mistake, because they're going to make it, they know how to process it, they know how to address it, they know how to take accountability for it, and they understand in doing that in a healthy way, right? Because you can do it in unhealthy ways. But if you're approaching it, like you said, from a place of vulnerability, taking ownership, and really trying to connect with your child, like that's a skill I want my kids to have, right? So when they grow up and they have relationships, whether it's their, you know, significant other or friendships, they understand everybody's human, everybody's going to have these moments, but man, if we can address it and take ownership over it and reconnect, like that builds a stronger bond than just the idea of Mom and Dad are perfect, they don't experience these emotions, they never mess up, because that creates a complex, right? For our kids to have to think emotions don't have a place. And I think that's one of the things I struggle with a lot as a child that I'm really trying to focus on with my kids is my parents didn't have the access to information to be able to help me deal with my big emotions. And a lot of those things got demonized, or not demonized, but they got put into a compartment that really didn't allow me to lean into it and to learn more about it and process it in a healthier way. So it just became more of a suppression type of thing. And you start to put on this mask of being a star athlete, right? Where kids feel like, again, this ties in the whole identity thing. We build our kids up on all these achievements, but we don't actually honor the grind and the struggle and the failure, and be able to use those moments that, which I love sports for, is because our kids are going to get kicked in the teeth, right? Your kid is going to sign up for tackle football, and he's going to be playing right guard, and he's going to be playing D tackle, and he wants to be a running back, and he wants to be a linebacker. How do you have that conversation? That's a conversation I'm having on a nightly basis, led by my child, where it's like, man, we can really instill some good into the challenges that sports are going to face. The same way we have to be mindful of celebrating, if my kid was the best player on the team, everywhere he went, what is that going to build up to when that eventual time comes where he is not, he's not the big fish in a small pond. Right. Now he's out there in the ocean.
All right, I got to switch gears because there's a couple of things I want to ask you about. And this next thing, I'm going to take a box, Travis. I'm going to give it to you. It's a giant soapbox. I'm going to let you step up on it, and then I'm going to walk away and just let you go, because I know this is a soapbox for you. A lot of parents worry that if they don't push their kids hard enough, the kids won't develop toughness or resilience. What is wrong with that idea, and what's a healthier way to build those traits without tying their worth to performance? So, soapbox presented. You may go.
Understand where your child's at, age-wise, developmentally speaking. Because when they get to 13 and 14, that's where we call the warrior phase. The warrior starts to emerge, that internal drive. Now, I got two kids who are wired completely different. One will go out there and kick a soccer ball for an hour without being, watched or told what to do. The other one, either wants to play with me or isn't really motivated. They're 8 and they're 6, right? So there's so much time to allow these things to develop, instead of me being like, son, if you want to be a NFL football player, a Major League Baseball player, you got to be out there doing agility and doing sprints. Now, I think as parents, we can find creative ways to create a play experience that incorporate these types of skills. And I always encourage parents to find ways to just play with your child and not get caught up in all the rules of how to do it perfectly, but just developing skills without making it skill development, I think is huge. But so many parents, and I've been guilty of this at times, where my ego is sitting there saying, if we don't go out there and run sprints, or we don't go out there and, go to the batting cage 3 times a week, then he's not going to be the best player on his team. Okay, well, maybe he doesn't want to be the best player on his team, right? Or maybe he doesn't want to be the star at sports. Now, if that's something you're hearing from your kids, especially at this phase where I'm at, understand they're not at a place where that's really sank in. I always told people from as old as I can remember, I want to play Major League Baseball. I was internally motivated to go out there and drag my dad outside and make him throw me 100 fly balls. It wasn't my dad doing that to me. And I think there are stories out there of, documentaries. David Beckham one stands out to me, where his dad was really hard on him. And yeah, he was one of the best soccer players, if not in the world. But the damage that was done, right? And you can say, well, he made hundreds of millions and he had all the fame and all that stuff. He talks openly about the struggles, right? And you got other people who have been glorified in sports for how hard they work and how hard they grind, when really their personal lives have taken massive sacrifices, right? Because they sold out to be the best of the best. And
we don't hear the stories of the ones who were pushed that didn't make it, but still had the terrible relationship with their parents.
And that's the one that, I try and use my story, right, to build this conversation and drive impact. But man, I got so many friends who have either overdosed and died from drugs or have serious addictions into their, 30s. Because their relationships and their potential was much greater than what they achieved. And their parents pushed them very hard to go and put in the extra work. Instead of the parent realizing, the reason I was successful is because I wanted it, right? Mm-hmm. My parents didn't want it for me. I wanted it. At some point, yes, my parents wanted it too, but it was me that was driving the bus. And we see this so often before kids are even 13 or 14, where it's like, we got to do it. We got to grind. We got to teach them grit. And grit is something you actually learn by going through hard, challenging times and then finding ways and coping skills to overcome that. And I think our generation growing up, we had a lot of hard, old school coaching. And I think, the narrative shifted quite a bit, even though I'm sure we'll get blown up in the comments about this. But having the ability to separate what was good, what were some of the good things those coaches were doing, and hard parenting, right? There's a lot of debate on gentle parenting versus, F around and find out parenting. Like, there's all these things that are out there. And really at the end of the day, when we're looking at developing a relationship with our kids, are we making the short-term decisions that are going to have the long-term impacts? Because I want my kids to want to come home for the holidays, whether they play high school sports, college sports, professional sports, they quit next year. I don't care. I want my relationship to be much deeper than just sports, while understanding how powerful this experience can be for us to go through the youth sports experience together.
Yeah, and I like to use the example of my daughter because she's by no means there yet. She's in 5th grade. And last fall, she wanted to quit soccer because she had a coach that took the joy out of it. And we talked to her, had honest conversations with her, allowed her to get her feelings out, like validated her feelings. We realized she likes playing soccer. She just didn't care how good she was. She just wanted to play with her friends. So we went to a different team that had a different culture, and they won 1 game, but they cheered each other on. She had so much fun. And the interesting thing about that is where they weren't as good, they didn't have a couple really great players who could go out and do stuff. She realized she had to play a little harder to do a little better. And then in playing a little harder, she realized how good she might be able to be. And getting that taste of how good she might be able to be has kind of awakened something in her that she's starting to get the bug a little bit. Like this fall, she's wanting to get to practice a little earlier and to kick the ball around a little bit more. And she wanted to be a ball girl for the middle school team. And like she's doing these little things that are signs that at 10 years old, it's starting to shift. And had I pushed her because I was worried about her developing toughness or grit or anything like that, I would have pushed her away from this game and she would have walked away and never had fun. But now, as a 5th grader, she's talking about, I might want to play in 6th grade next year at the school. And she's doing these extra things and she's enjoying it so much more. And she's asking, like, we're having conversations at home about soccer now that she's asking a question, or I'm like, hey, what do you want to do at practice this week? Oh, can we do this or can we do that? And it's these things that she's wanting to do because she wants to get better, but she's also having fun with it. And allowing her, I think as parents, we're so emotionally invested in our kids that we think if it doesn't happen right now, it's not going to happen. And we're so worried that our kids are going to fall behind at 7, 8, 9 years old, not realizing that what will take them further than us pushing them is allowing them to fall in love with it on their own, develop that intrinsic internal motivation, and then going. If they have that at 12 years old, in almost every sport, they're going to catch up. I was texting you about this a week or so ago. Like if they have that drive and the genetic ability to do it, then they're probably going to catch up. But if they can have the best genetics in the world, but if they don't care, or if we make them not enjoy the sport, they hate it, it doesn't matter how physically gifted they are because they're not going to want it. So if we can help them to find that joy in it so that they're the ones motivated to do it, then we've done our job regardless of where they end up at whatever level they tap out at.
I love that, man. That story just gave me chills because so often we try and manufacture these things inside of our kids instead of, like you said, allow it to develop, give it the space, give it the support. And one thing you mentioned that I want to highlight is the intentional conversation. And in that book, Hero, the third exercise is taking your child to an ice cream parlor or a coffee shop, somewhere where you can get a treat and just have a conversation outside of the space of sports like you did with your daughter, and ask them how they really feel about playing travel baseball or Little League baseball or soccer or whatever sport. And then go through another 3 or 4 questions where you're actually getting them to open up about their experience. Because again, we have this perceived experience that our kids are having in sports, and it's easy to get caught up in the emotions and the attachments and the fear of missing out or falling behind.
Well,
but
I remember sitting in her bed last year after practice. Sorry to interrupt you. And
no, you're good.
I said, Liv, I think you enjoy playing soccer. I do. I don't think you care about how good you are. I don't really. I think you just want to play with your friends. Yeah. And I think me acknowledging that and allowing that to be okay was the first trigger point of, oh, I don't have to do what these other people are doing. I don't have to be a beast, which is what her coach wanted her to, like, wanted the girls to become. Like that, Daddy doesn't care about that. He just wants me to be able to play and have fun, and that's okay. Like giving her permission and allowing her to internalize that this is just about fun right now. Like, I just want you to go out and find something you love doing, to build the relationships that come through sports, to learn the things like, and we talked about it. That, kiddo, that's all I want. I just want you to go out there and be able to have a blast and do this. Giving her that permission was that tiny little bit of fuel on a spark that was already there. I didn't have to like pour gasoline all over it. I just had to like wave it a little bit, and it sparked up a little bit. And then she went through some things on her own that is now starting to fan it a little bit more. And we'll see where it goes. Maybe she plays next year in 6th grade. Maybe she doesn't. I care because I love watching my daughter play soccer. But if she doesn't want to do that and she wants to go more into dance or more into running or more into horse riding or more, you do you, boo-boo. Like, I just want you to find the thing you're passionate about, because that's what matters more than any achievement.
Yeah, and again, trying to manufacture these things within our kids, I think, is one of the biggest mistakes we make as parents, instead of being able to zoom out and see that the long-term vision here of where they're at 8 is going to be much different when they go through puberty and they develop, the way they develop physically and emotionally, and how we can build that connection and that trust. And I think what you highlight, right, is you built that trust with your daughter, where she feels safe as she's kind of getting out of this phase of needing mom and dad's validation all the time, to being able to say, you know what? That's okay if you just want to play to play with your friends, and it's okay if you don't want to be a beast. And I think that's, again, something we as parents and coaches do, is we want our kids to be that dog. We want them to be that beast. And it's like, if they're not internally motivated to do that, and we try and manufacture that, I'll bet a lot of money that it's going to go in the wrong direction. Versus, how do we take that step back? How do we give them some space? How do we build that connection and trust? And I love it. You did it in a safe space, right? It's in her bed. It is a safe moment where, there's no fear in the world. It's just me and dad, and we can actually put our cards on the table, instead of in the car ride after a game where we're like, why aren't you playing hard? Why aren't you working hard at sports? We're spending all this money. And these are the things we do as parents.
Yeah. All right. We're running out of time here. So let me go here. What have I not asked you today that you think parents need to hear the answer to?
I don't know. Like I said, we could do a number of these shows, right, on the different stuff. I think understanding where we are at as parents and where we want to get to as parents. And we talked about that in my own personal journey, but I think I want to encourage every parent who's listening to this to, without judgment and without trying to be perfect and beat yourself up, I just encourage everybody to take 5 or 10 minutes over the next couple of days and just think about where you are at in your own personal development and your own personal journey, and what are 1 or 2 things that you can focus on from an educational standpoint or emotional development standpoint to show up differently in a good way for your kids as they continue through the journey of youth sports and the journey of life. And again, for me, I just subscribe to the mindset of being a lifelong learner. I'm going to make these mistakes. I have to learn how to give myself grace more often than I do, right? These are all things that I'm working on, but I just want to encourage every parent to take a moment over the next couple of days to focus in on what can we do, right? And how is that going to enhance the relationship, the connection, the love, and the trust with our kids? Because we parent from a place of instinct, and oftentimes those instincts are not the greatest instincts, and they show up in those moments, right, when we get triggered and our ego's driving the bus. So that would be my message.
All right, last question for you. I always like to end on an encouragement. So what would you say to the parent who is just trying to get by? They're like, the logistics are going crazy. They're overstimulated. They understand everything you're saying, but right now they just need some type of encouragement as they drive their kid to practice tonight. How would you encourage them this week?
You are not alone. I think we oftentimes think we are the only ones going through this, and it's not to try and suppress the feeling, but find somebody or some people, right, that you can build this connection with. And that's why I love your platform and what you're doing. Obviously, we're passionate about what we're doing. It's really about building a community of sports parents who understand we're all going through this in different ways. But a lot of times there are common threads and common themes to the struggles. And I love, a lot of the memes that are out there, right? Where you just see the crazy sports parent whose hair's all over the place and they just got the schedule dialed in and they're like, what did we sign ourselves up for, kind of thing. So there is humor to be had in this process, but I encourage anybody who is going through that struggle to find something to connect with, right? You're listening to this podcast. That's one of the first steps, right? To understanding what are we in and how can we all get better together.
Travis, if people want to follow you or find out more about what you're doing, how can they find you?
3athletics.com. You can follow our socials, 3A Athletics. And then for me personally, Lunchbox Hero 45, Lunchbox Hero 23. I try and keep it a little bit lighter on my personal stuff. But again, just want everybody to know, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your platform with me. I love what you guys are doing and the mission we're on and how we can continue to come together and push this thing forward. Because at the end of the day, this is for our kids and the next generation of kids, right? So if we can move that ball forward for this generation of parents and coaches and athletes, just think of how much better it's going to be in 15, 20 years, not just worrying about what happens tomorrow.
Travis, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today. As a reminder, if you want your weekend playbook, head to healthysportsparents.com/playbook or click down in the show notes for the link. The merch store is open as well. That link is in the show notes. Every shirt, sticker, or hat you buy is one step closer to helping the Healthy Sports Parent book get published. If you like the show today, I'm going to invite you to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. If you're listening to Apple Podcasts, it'd be a huge help for you to write up a small review. If you're on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button as well. If this episode has helped you in any way, the best way you can help us grow this platform is sharing this episode with a friend. Most of all, I hope you enjoy your time with your kids this week, watching them play the sport they love. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk again soon.